Often today we're told, don't do this and you can't say that. It seems everywhere you step, it's the wrong direction. But what can you do? SHAIR.care's code provides guidance and a clear direction.
Welcome to SHAIR.care, an all-inclusive community sharing experience, strength, and hope to create strong, healthy, and inspiring relationships. SHAIR.care communities work toward every individual feeling safe, valued, and heard, free from the threat of danger, pain, or harm. Each episode, founder Damian Andrews explores the principles underpinning SHAIR.care and invites expert special guests to share their knowledge so you can easily reap the benefits so many others experience. You hold the choice to create your future. Let it be with strong, healthy, and inspiring relationships.
Hello and welcome to an On the Couch episode of the SHAIR.care podcast. Our belief is that global peace starts at home. Feeling safe, valued, and heard gives you a foundation to confidently step out and make the world a happier and safer place for everyone. Because in today's world, it's in your own selfish best interest to help others. In the Middle Ages, a knight was expected to have strength and skills to face combat, and expected to temper that with strict rules of etiquette and conduct. Now, the Knight's Code was introduced. In the Middle Ages, a knight was expected to have the strength and skills to face combat, and expected to temper this with strict rules of etiquette and conduct. The Knight's Code was introduced Hello and welcome to an On the Couch episode of the SHAIR.care podcast. Our belief is that global peace starts at home. Feeling safe, valued, and heard gives you a foundation to confidently step out and make the world a happier and safer place for everyone. Because in today's world, it's in your own selfish best interest to help others. In the Middle Ages, a knight was expected to have strength and skills to face combat, and also expected to temper this with strict rules of etiquette and conduct. The Knight's Code introduced the concept of chivalrous conduct, bravery, courtesy, honesty, valour, loyalty, and gallantry towards women. Now, it was a moral system that went beyond rules. What do we mean by moral system? Well, in today's world, we'd say, well, it stepped above legal technicalities. And when I look at my own career and work that I've done, I've found that I've achieved much better results because my part of my work involves, legal disputes, and looking for results and improving the bottom line of projects, mostly construction projects. That's an area of work that I work in, and I was particularly good at it. Not so much because I was good at having legal arguments. And I'm sure anyone who's ever had an argument, generally, there's usually not really a winner out of that. And certainly from anyone who's been through legal battles, shall we say, will know that there's generally no clear winner. It's very arduous. There's a lot of you did this and you didn't do that, and argued with lawyers making those arguments. Where I've succeeded really well is one, understanding what the rules were. So this was, part of that legal technicality. So understanding what was the requirement, And then the better results came from being able to have discussions that step beyond that. And I'll give an example. There was a project that I was working on, and it was in trouble. A lot of things had gone wrong. It was near the end of the project. It was a high-rise building. It was 23, 24 stories high. It was an office building. It had a car park in the first 5 or 6 levels, and then it was office building after that. And it was leased out by a government tenant. So they actually had the entire building as a lease, but they didn't own the building. That was owned by someone else. Anyway, there was a number of issues that went wrong with this project during its construction phase. And so I've come in, and my role was to sort it out, which is, often I got handed those kind of things to try and make better. And so as in working through that, I'm working with the client's superintendent, and he was very grumpy. He was an older man, probably should have retired a long time ago. I think he was in his 70s, and could be quite difficult to deal with. But I didn't let that bother me. What I wanted to try and do is find ways to make this work. So my first approach was to listen, not to go, this is all we're obligated to do, and suck it up because the contract says so, which I could have done. But I went in and I listened, and I was chairing the weekly meetings between the clients. You had the government client there, you had the superintendents, you had the construction company, you had the owner who was doing the development, and so working through these problems. A lot of times I'd listen to what was going on, what people were saying, the complaints, and what needed to be done. And there was a smaller variation that they wanted. They wanted to put in one of the car park levels, they wanted to install a bike storage area. So it was to be done afterwards. After it wasn't part of the original design, is what I mean. It was a variation to add this into one of the car parks. It was a bike storage area, but not just that. They also wanted where the bike storage area was some showers, some ablution blocks, so that the people riding in on their bikes could just put their bike in the bike cages, step across to the ablution block, the showers, and have a shower, get changed, and go to work. And so it was an approved variation, so we was getting paid for that. But what I did with that is I made sure everything was done to the highest standard, and it was a little bit more than, it was above what was required. It took a little extra effort to make sure things were done really, really well. And there was a couple of things too in the design, where one of the things that they wanted was that they originally had shower curtains as opposed to doors. And as it turned out, so we built this, well, before I get to that, we built this and it was really good. They were really impressed with the quality. And there was a bit of calming down of, yelling at all the other things that had gone wrong. But then also too in the design, there were shower curtains as opposed to doors. And when people were coming and having the showers, water was flowing out because of that design, which wasn't my client's fault, the builder. They built it to the design, and we built it really well. But we talked about it, and we looked at what could be done, and we worked through, and we come up with a design that lifted we looked at lifting the bottom up to create a step, but that wasn't how the water was flowing out. It was actually flowing out because of, as people were showering, for some reason the curtain was blowing out a little bit beyond, and the water was running down the curtain and onto the floor outside of the shower. So we decided to put some doors on, and we got an extra variation for that, to put the doors on, but again, did it really, really well. So went over and above, and I spent extra time with the client to show them what I was doing, show them the quality and how we were doing this to make that work really well. It wasn't stuff I had to do, and certainly I wasn't paid to do those extra things. that changed the whole dynamic. That was the key. There was a number of things I've been working up to and listening, but that element there, where I stepped beyond what was required in the rules, as in the contract, to do, but gave that little bit extra service, a step to a higher moral code, and said, I'm going to make sure that they get good quality. The result was the change in perception on the project changed dramatically with the client and the owner, the client and the tenant being the government organisation. They went from being really standoffish because they weren't getting a product that they liked to being really very open to communication, open to discussing things well, accepting that there were some things that were just unfortunate, and I'll get to one of those stories in a minute. So that changed because of that relationship, and a number of things flowed out of that. An example was in that building, and this is where it's like I went to that extra effort, but it wasn't at my cost overall, or my client's cost, the builder. Because later on, as the building was being populated, so a couple of things that flowed on from that. As the building was being populated, the DDA toilets, the disabled toilets, they had push closed doors. So when you push the door open, it closes, like a lot of doors have self closes. What happened was there was an employee for that government organisation that was very disabled. She was in an electric wheelchair and she struggled to get the door open. And we looked at the doors and the outside casing showed that it was a number 2 closer, which meant number 1 was the softest, 2, and I think it went up to 5. Anyway, so we said, okay, well, let's change them to number 1 closers. Because we looked at a number of different options. One was putting in self-opening doors. At that time, they looked at it and said, well, we don't want to do that, because if we do that, we're going to have to do it in all the other government buildings, which we don't have the budget for. So that was out. They initially didn't want to have no self-closer, because they thought if there isn't a mess made accidentally, they don't want the door left open, sort of thing. So that's why we said, okay, let's do the number 1, change it from a number 2 to a number 1, makes it softer to close, which was, okay, no problem. We organised a variation. I think it was about $26,000 to change all the toilets in the building, the DDA toilets, to the number 1 closer. I wasn't wanting to do that because the building was being populated. There was a lot of people there. It just meant it was difficult to do construction in a populated building. It's better to, but anyway, that's what they wanted. Then when the first self-closer was taken off, they looked inside, and it was a number 1 closer. So it was the softest it was going to be. For whatever reason, the casing had the wrong label on it. Looking there going, oh, what do we do? And then talking with the installer, with all those self-closers, there was a little pin you could take out. And if you took that pin out, what it did was meant the self-closer didn't work anymore. So it wouldn't shut, it wouldn't be pressurized, so you didn't have to push it. It would just be like a free opening door. And so I thought about that, and I went to the superintendent and I said, look, what I've found is, 1, we've got the softest closers here. 2, if we, as you are aware, going through this process, we're going to have to shut down these areas, seal it all off, because not only, what I was saying was, we've got the softest closer. So the only option left was to take them off. So we talked about that, and we got an additional that looked at the cost of doing that, and I didn't really want to do that. So because again, to take all those closures off meant that we would have to patch and repair. So that's worse than changing them because we have to seal off the area, sand, paint, all that kind of stuff in a live environment, which is not great to do. And so I talked about it with the superintendent. I said, well, what we've actually found is if we take these pins out, the doors are free opening, and we get the same result. The other upside of that too is if we just take the pins out, don't take them off, because this is an asset, and being government as well, the government owns the asset. You're going to have to store it. You can't just throw it away. That's going to be a pain to do. What do you say? We just take these pins out, leave them there as a good solution? And he said, yeah, that sounds sensible. Then I said, what about the variation? What do we do with that? The $26,000 variation? And he said, don't worry about it. Just keep it. So basically, I got paid, well, my client got paid $26,000 for taking a number of pins out of self-closing doors. And that's where we're coming back to, these kind of things where you step above and do the right thing. It actually swings and roundabouts comes back. And on that project, like that was one example, I got paid $26,000 for taking out some pins. Overall, with little things like that, it was about $125,000, I think it was. It was definitely over $120,000 of extra of money paid for work that ultimately didn't happen. But the superintendent just said, look, you've done the right thing with other areas, just take that. So that's where that swings and roundabouts came in. Another example from that same project was, for whatever reason, and this happens sometimes, well, it does happen a lot, but the design concept didn't make it into the design as far as the car park goes. Now, the concept was, because it was a high-rise car park in a windy area, the car park was to be designed so the floor was basically sloping all the way around. It wasn't flat, so that it was always at an angle, and that way when water come in from the wind, it would run. Because if you've got flat areas, even as much as it is flat with concrete, there's always dips and hollows. So that's, and water can pond there. Well, as it turns out, when they designed this building, it's a true story, the concept of this ramped car park was overlooked somehow in the design, and they've designed the car park flat. So you've got ramps and then a flat parking area, and then another ramp to the next level and a flat parking area. This didn't get identified until the building had been built. And then they got a really heavy rain. So it was, and obviously ponding occurred. And because of how buildings are built with tolerances and things like that, the car park roof was built to tolerance. It wasn't extra height. It was built. So we're looking at options as to what we can do. It's like, could we put some screed on there to give it a little bit of slope? But you couldn't do that, because where the screed would go, it would be to make the tolerance between the height of the roof and the floor too narrow. So you'd have cars, like if you're talking about your SUVs and your cars, your full drives, that hit the roof or hit the sprinkler system in the roof. And they're playing around with lots and lots of different options to solve this. And because again, when someone's angry, they don't really see beyond that. And the client initially was really, really angry. And because of, over time, we went through many, many meetings discussing this problem, and there was a fix that was going to cost something. Well, it was proposed. It wasn't never going to work, but it was about $2 million. And it was never going to work. It just wasn't feasible, couldn't fit. Anyway, this went on for a long time in meetings. I'm chairing the meetings, but because of little steps that I'd make, stepping beyond the rules, going, oh, contractually, we could have this argument about it, but what are we going to do? Tear down the whole building and rebuild it? It was one of those situations where you couldn't really do much. Some financial compensation would have likely been the result. It would have been probably a substantial amount, and it could have been a legal battle that went on forever. spending a lot of money on legal fees. That happens, I'm sure you probably know of, but certainly that it happens a lot where a lot of money is spent on legal fees and a result is not really beneficial to either party. And so as we're moving forward, there was another couple of heavy rainy days. And because the client was the owner and the tenant were more relaxed because some things were going well, and people are people, no matter whatever corporate label they might have, people are still people. And so they've got to the point where they're happy with a number of things that had gone on, to do like the bike rack and a number of other things that we did, and had a heavy rain. They walked around, and after that they come back and they said, look, the reality is, there is some ponding, but most of it's pretty shallow, like, only a little bit, and it's not really something, that can be, a big issue. But there is one area where it's too deep when we need to do something about it. And I immediately had an idea, but I thought I'd just shut up and see if someone comes up with anything. And so they're having a bit of a discussion, and I'm listening, and no one come up with a solution. So I just said, look, can we drain it? And sometimes it's better to be lucky and good, because that's a good idea. So we pull out the plans, and it just turned out, it just happened to be there was a stormwater drain directly, like a stormwater pipe from the stormwater drain that went underneath this area on the other side. So you've got the car park up the top, well, the flat of the where you're driving, and underneath on the next level below, there was a stormwater drain that went directly underneath it. And it turned out what we did was we cored a hole, put a drain, and tapped into that to that stormwater pipe, and for $4,500 fixed the problem, and the client was really happy. That all came about because I stepped above what the rules were to a higher set of principles of, okay, I want to try and work this out. And so that's where we've got this moral system, that goes beyond rules. That's what the code is. And you get, from my experience anyway, you get much, much better results when you apply a higher level of principles to how you operate. And maybe it's not strictly in accordance with, if you're dealing with contracts and stuff like that, it's not strictly in accordance with the contract, or it might not be strictly in accordance with whatever that circumstance is, and we'll go through some of those a bit more. But it gives you a way of interacting with a person when we're dealing, again, from a higher set of principles. And we talk about, the Knight's Code was bravery, courtesy, honesty, valour, loyalty. And then there's gallantry towards women, but we're moving, there was a different, back then. We're now looking at equality, and so still have gallantry towards women. Don't get me wrong, we want to move this forward a little bit. But when we're talking about those principles, you go, well, what is, this honesty, in what were we really intending when we entered into this contract? Treating people politely and listening to them has tremendous effects on how we relate to each other. So we're holding the code we're holding ourselves to a higher philosophy in how we operate. And that's where we looked at, well, what would that look like today? What would, the Knight's Code of Chivalry look like in today's world? And that's where we've updated. And as you can see, we'll talk through this. As we go through this, you'll see how that applies. But also to what the reason for highlighting this is, as you'll know, in the world, there's a lot of screeching and complaining about, people not doing this and not doing that, and how, this was offensive and that was offensive. Part of what the code is to focus on is let's focus on what people are doing right as well. Because again, as we talk through it, you'll see that this is actually happening a lot. People are acting very well. I've mentioned it before in other podcasts, when driving around, a lot of times people will let me in when I indicate to go in. I let people in a lot. So a lot of people are acting in this manner. So let's celebrate that. Let's share that. That's the message that we should be sending out rather than going on about, oh, someone said something that offended me, which we'll deal with in a minute. So the first code that we've got is to like yourself and separate behaviours from the person. I mean, liking yourself, it's really important. You really need to recognize that you are a valuable, amazing person. Yet you have behaviours that sometimes are not great. I've been listening to my On the Couch podcast. I've shared some of my terrible behaviours that I've done in the past. They're just and it wasn't intentional. I talked about one last week of where someone parked where the bride was to be parking, and rather than politely saying move, I got angry and said, "What the hell are you doing parking there?" And got angry at them, which that's what I knew at that time. So that was my behavior. It's different. My intention was to look after the bride. So my intention was good. And this is where it's important to remember and to like yourself, that you are a good person, and separate those behaviors from the person, especially when you're dealing with other people. Sometimes, I've had that many times where someone's been really upset. And I go, oh man, you must be having a bad day. What's going on? I go, oh, yeah, sorry. I didn't mean to snap like that. And it's amazing how that approach changes everything when you separate the behavior from the person, because the person, you don't know what's going on in their life. They might have had a huge, maybe, as terrible as this is, maybe one of their children got really sick or even died. Or maybe their partner. I've had that where someone has not, their wife died, and they were just carrying that, not and getting on, and their behavior obviously reflected that, because that's got to be so traumatic. That would be, I can't imagine what that would be like. And obviously that's going to affect your behavior. So it's really important. I believe that majority of people, nearly all people, are good people. And there might be some exceptions out there, but I think generally people are good people. And if they're not behaving in a certain way that's not great, it's probably something beyond, who they are as a person. And let's put aside too from that we have differences of opinion. There's people that I just don't have the same view as. So we don't really associate with each other. And that's not saying that theirs is wrong. It's just different. And people are allowed to be. That's the whole point of having the freedom to be who you are. I'm not going to criticize them because they're different. I'll learn from it because it makes me stronger. But it's important to like yourself fundamentally, and also to separate the behaviors from the person. Not just both separate your behaviors from who you are. You make mistakes. You're human. Learn from it and move forward. Same token, other people, they have behaviors that their behaviors are not who they are. They might be good people and just be having a bad day. So recognize that. So like yourself and separate behaviors from the person. Second code is to laugh at yourself and not take offense at the opinions of others, which is probably really relevant today because I shouldn't say everyone, a lot of people are offended by almost everything. Especially if you get on the internet, you'll see that someone's offended at something, which probably doesn't bother somebody else. And this is where it's important to not take things so seriously. And I think this, for me, stems from when I was young. I had a very strong and lovely, my mum was amazing in many different ways. And she was very much and drummed that into me, that it doesn't matter what anyone says, and recite the whole thing of sticks and stones may break your bones and names will never hurt me. That kind of thing. It's really important to, one, if we make a mistake, we made a mistake, laugh at it. I make mistakes all the time. And if you're listening to my podcast, you've heard them. There was one podcast where I had a mental blank and I'm referring to Thomas Edison as Benjamin Franklin. I mean, Benjamin Franklin. I mean, he dealt with electricity and the light globe. Not the light globe. He dealt with electricity and flying the kite and lightning. And I'm referring to Benjamin Franklin as the inventor of the light globe. I mean, it's funny. It's like I made a mistake. Big deal. You know, we get so uptight about, oh my God, I made a mistake. It really, it doesn't matter. And this is what I'm saying, to laugh at yourself. And not take offense at others, because a lot of time, this is where it's really important to recognize that, I mean, firstly, a lot of times people will say things to offend you, to get a reaction out of you. Recognize that. Don't react. You're in control. Don't let them be in control. But so, yeah, so from that perspective, I know from my side of things, I couldn't care less what someone says about me. I mean, because I know majority of times they're trying to get a rise. They're trying to get you to react. And I'm in control of me. They're not in control of me. The other thing to do is look at the person giving, the opinion. Are they validly qualified to give that opinion? Do they really understand what's going on? If they're criticizing you, do they really understand your circumstance? I mean, people might criticize me for getting and go, oh, he doesn't know the difference between Benjamin Franklin and Thomas Edison. Well, they're right to start with. I didn't in that moment I had a mental blank and I didn't know. Fine. But also too, who are they? Are they, anyone really qualified to give that opinion? And who cares? It's like, so what? Someone's opinion, everyone has an opinion. Are they some really super important person that's going to have any impact on your life if you ignore it? In most cases, very few people. I mean, if you're in a courtroom and a judge has an opinion, well, that's probably, and it's relevant to your case because you're in the courtroom, then that's probably something you should give consideration to. But for some person that decides that they're just going to go, that you're a, whatever, and it's like, are they even really qualified to give that opinion? That's where, from my perspective, they're the two categories I look at. Is one, is just not to take that, to look at it and go, well, is it really worth paying attention to? And two, who are they? A lot of times I don't even look. I don't look at comments and stuff like that, and really it's just because it's not who I am. And how would they even know? Especially when you're on the internet, they don't know you. They know nothing about you other than a very short snippet, and then they're casting an opinion. And this is where that's where I say, laugh at yourself, because hey, you make mistakes. It's okay to make mistakes. We do. And laugh at yourself. It's funny. Learn from it and move forward. And if someone has an opinion, so what? At the end of the day, it's their opinion, and that's not just for. It's nice to get the good opinions as well, but same token too, it's just their opinion. You know what you've done, and that's what you need to focus on. One of the other codes is exercise self-control, erring on caution where strength differential exists. And when we're initially thinking about that, generally first thought is physical strength, and that's probably first thought, but it's not just physical strength. It's where you are in a position of power over somebody else, or you have the ability to influence that. And this then also, again, comes from the strength side of things, comes from certainly when I was young. My mum, again, said strongly influenced in my life, but she always said, when we were little, I had a sister who was, less than a year younger than me. No, actually a year and a bit. So she was 13 months younger than me. If I do my maths right, I think I got it right. I was born in August. She was born in September the following year. Yeah, so a little bit over a year younger. And my mum would say to me, be careful when you're playing together when we were younger, because you're a boy, you're stronger, and you could easily hurt your sister without realizing it. And that was a philosophy that I've pretty much invoked all my life. It's like, be careful about how you use your strength, because you might accidentally hurt someone. Um, and I think from that perspective too, it's about using your strength to help other people as well, which is, no, we'll get to that in a minute. But, exercise self-control. Recognize where you have strength, and don't, um, and be careful about that, because you could accidentally hurt someone. And it said it's not just physical strength, but even where you have, if you might be, in a corporate environment, in a boardroom where you command the boardroom, and you don't allow, ideas to come forward. And that reminds me of Nelson Mandela talking about his dad, who was a tribal leader, if I understood the story correctly. And when all the people got together to talk about things, he would allow everyone else to speak first, to gather those ideas. And that's the kind of thing we're talking about. So we're going, okay, do you have power or influence here? And then exercise caution to allow things to come forward. I've had that even with my with assistants that I've had, being very careful about how to say things so that they can feel free to share ideas, because they have valuable information that can help you. So that's another code of conduct. Exercise self-control, erring on caution where a strength differential exists. The next code is use your strength to protect the equal rights, dignity, and welfare of all. And this comes from, treat people how you'd like to be treated. But certainly from a strength perspective, one of the things I love reading was in the American military. The military commanders make sure all their subordinates eat first. Well, so when they go to the mess tent, as it's called, strange name for where you get food, maybe because they have food fights all the time. It could be. Anyway, I digress. But the military commanders make sure all their personnel eat first before they eat. So they're protecting their people, and making sure because they've got this, they're the commander, they could go in first. They make sure everyone else gets it. But we've added in there, we want to make sure we protect the equal rights. We want equality across all spectrums, gender, race, because people in today's world, we live in a positive sum world, and that happened from the start of the Industrial Revolution, where innovation creates value. Innovation creates a bigger pie. We can have, when we look at how the population has grown and the rate of growth compared to the rate of improvement in the quality of life, the improvement in quality of life is far outstripped the pace of population growth. So our pie has got bigger, and that's through innovation. And that's where we want to protect the equal rights of everyone around us, because everyone has ideas, and that's where innovation comes from, is from ideas, from new ideas to solve problems that we have, and problems we don't even know that we've had. As we move forward, no one 150 years ago had a problem with air travel because it didn't exist, or comfort in air travel. Anything to do with air travel, there was no problem 150 years ago because it didn't exist. That's where innovation comes in, because through innovation we have new ideas that creates new problems to be solved. And the more people working on those problems, take for example cancer, the more people working on solving the problem of cancer, the faster that's going to be resolved. And that's why we want to protect the equal rights of people, because everyone has thoughts and ideas that can contribute to solve the problems we have and make our world a better place. Obviously, treating people with dignity and respect, and ensuring that they have good welfare, because then we can all contribute as well. So that's a code. Use your strength to protect the equal rights, dignity, and welfare of all. Next code, uplift the weak and defenseless with succor and to give given to those in need. So uplift the weak and defenseless with succor to those in need. And that's basically just helping people that need to be helped. It doesn't take a lot, and that doesn't mean you have to run around helping everybody. We've got to be, careful that you don't, put yourself in a position where you then need to be helped. But I know from my perspective, when I'm walking past someone on the street that's asking for some money, maybe they do go and buy cigarettes with it. I don't know, but at the end of the day, I'll give that. And I remember a long time ago, I was walking through a mall, and I was actually didn't have a job. Didn't have much money, didn't have anything in my bank account. I had a note in my wallet. I think it was a $20 note. That was all I had. I didn't have any change. And an Aboriginal man has come up to me and said, can I give him any change? And I honestly didn't have any, but I did have the $20 note. And I thought, oh, whatever, I'll give it to him. And I pulled it out and I handed it to him. And at first he looked shocked. He turned it over a couple of times, I think, to check whether it was real. And then all of a sudden his face lit up and he's dancing around and I watched him. I just stood there and watched him. And he jumped up on top of a garbage bin and he was dancing, and then he jumped on all these other things and went over to, I'm assuming it's his partner or wife or whoever was on a bench seat, and dancing in front of her, waving this money. And it was just amazing to watch. Now, obviously, that's helped them a little bit with whatever they needed help with financially. From my perspective, I said I was unemployed at the time, but the next day I got a call for a job interview. I think I was feeling really good about myself and I got the job. End of the day, I made not only his day, but his partner's day by giving him some money. And same token too, I mean, it doesn't take much. You don't have to give money. I mean, and the amount of times where, we were talking, we've had this on a number of the podcasts, we were talking about just smiling at someone. You walk down the street, smile and say hi. It's like, it makes people, and when you're at a cash register, be polite to the person serving you and smile at them. You make their day. Those little things make a difference. And, especially we come back to, it links to that one before where there's a strength differential. You're actually looking after and helping lift up those people. The more people we can lift up, the better off the world is going to be. So lift up the weak and defenseless with succor given to those in need. So we're assisting people in times of hardship. And this is where, when we talk about, I mentioned earlier about the principle, the code being actually happening in life. Think about all the times where there's been a tragedy, there's been a flood, there's been a crash, plane crash, there's been a fire or anything like that, and look at that and how many people come in and help people in need. We do this as human beings. This is what we do, and so it's happening all the time. We just need to celebrate that and make that the focus of what we're doing, because people are doing great things out there, and they are certainly helping people around there. So this is not about saying, oh no, people aren't doing it. They are doing it. That's the point. People are doing this all the time. We want to celebrate that. We want to promote that, because that's what's really happening out there. Yes, there's some screechy wheels complaining, that things aren't happening, but there's actually a lot of good things happening, certainly in today's world. The next code is that violence is only permitted on the battlefield with willing opponents to the extent the rules allow, or to the minimum extent required in self-defense. And we'll go through both of those. The first one is on the battlefield. The battlefield is any sporting field, any place where sport happens. And with willing opponents, obviously they've played the game, and to the extent that rules allow. Well, what does that mean? Well, let's take, say, a game of football, gridiron for those, football, I think for most of the world is, soccer. Um, and, but let's take a gridiron or, Australian rules, rugby, any of those ball type sports where there's a tackle involved. Now, a tackle, if someone was standing on the corner in the street and you went up and tackled them, that would be highly inappropriate. It would be, it'd be an offence to go and just tackle someone on the street and, throw them to the ground. But in the context of the game on the battlefield, with the willing opponents, the rules allow a tackle. And whatever sport it is, there's certain rules that allow. I mean, you take, for example, motor sports. Let's take motorsports. In Formula One, pushing someone out of the way to pass them is not allowed. And so you wouldn't do that. In NASCAR, it's certainly allowed. You're allowed to, bump other people out of the way. That's part of the rules. And this is what we're saying is from that perspective. I mean, those things, again, are violent acts when you look at it. If you're having a drive, driving a car, let's say you're driving a car down a windy road and the person in front of you is going a bit slow and you put the bumper to them and push them out of the way, that's not appropriate. But in the realm of NASCAR, it is appropriate. And I want to touch on, with my son as well, when he was growing up, well, he's still growing up, but when we're playing video games, and we talked to him about video games, and because there is an inherent, some of the games are violent, and we talked about that and said, okay, well, this is a video game. In the rules of the game, you're allowed to do that. This is what the game is. You can shoot someone in a video game. You're having a battle, or whatever. But that's the video game. That's not real life. Real life is different. And in this game, the rules say you can do it. In this game of life, you're not allowed to do it. You need to separate both. And that's where we're coming. Because if you take violence out of a football game, whichever version you want to call it, it's going to be pretty boring. No tackles, no, high marks, whatever it is, where you jump on top of someone to catch the ball. All that, if you took what is defined as violence out of sport, then it would be pretty boring. It wouldn't be playable in most cases. So that's where, and we can make that distinction. And same with video games. And video games, I look at my son. He plays some quite violent video games. It has no effect on his life. Because he has a higher principle that it's in the rules of that game. Outside of the rules, it doesn't apply. It's being able to make that conscious distinction. The other part of that is to the minimum extent required in self-defense. And again, I'm going to reference my son's karate sensei. And I've done quite a number of martial arts myself. And all of it comes down to it's for self-defense. It is there. There are people in this world that, at this stage, maybe we will get to a better point of evolution in the future, but there are people in the world that might attack you. Now, I believe you should be in a position where you can defend yourself, but to the minimum extent required. Sometimes that's going to mean, just walking away. Someone comes up and is yelling in your face in a pub or whatever, you can just turn around and walk away. I've done it. I've done the opposite too. Bad form on my behalf many years ago, where I've yelled at someone at a pub and I probably shouldn't have. And the other person walked away, which was really interesting because, especially given, when I looked at the guy, he's like massive and I'm here screaming at him and he's walked away. This is where we look at what is the minimum needed to defend yourself. And if someone grabs hold of you, well then there's a different response from that as well. But we're doing what we need to protect ourselves to the minimum level. So that's where that code is. Violence is only permitted on the battlefield with willing opponents to the extent allowed by the rules, and that covers off our sports and all the other games and stuff we play. And then outside of that, in life, to the minimum extent required in self-defense. So if you are attacked, you can defend yourself. We refrain from the wanton giving of offence. This is deliberate and unprovoked, is what wanton means. So does it mean you can't give someone offence? Well, there we go, deliberate and unprovoked. Sometimes it is appropriate to to say something back if someone says something. Generally, it's not. Most of the time, you can let it go, as we talked about. Laugh, not take offence at the opinions of others. There are times when you need to address the situation, and that's why we say refrain from the wanton giving of offence. And certainly unprovoked. Don't walk around offending people. Offensing? There's a new word. Don't. See, I can laugh at myself. Offensing is not a word. Maybe it will be one day. But it's about just being polite. You don't need to just give offence, and there seems to be there's a whole gamut of people doing that, and the internet probably allows that to be a little bit more out there because someone can say something in a circumstance. If it was a face-to-face encounter, they'd probably be less reluctant to say anything. But because they're on the internet and no one can see them, or there's little repercussion that can come from it, they spew out all this stuff. So let's just refrain from that. Let's just be polite. Don't give offence. No need to do it. Eschew unfairness, meanness, and deceit, and that's eschew means is avoid using. Let's avoid using. Let's avoid, operating from a perspective of being unfair, being mean, and being deceitful. And it kind of links to the previous code. But again, let's just be nice to each other. It's not hard. It actually is much more beneficial. You get much more by being nice. So many people have helped me because I've just been nice to people. It's like they wanted it. If you're offensive to someone, who's going to? I love it when people, you see their character and they're always complaining about other people and criticizing other people, and they go, "No one helps me." It's like, do you wonder why? Why no one's helping you? Because you're just hanging crap on people all the time. You're just being mean to people. And you're deceitful as well. And this is what we're talking about, honesty. If you're an honest person, people will help you. That's why I think that's principle kindness, and not principle, the code speaks for itself. It's like, let's not be unfair, let's not be mean, and let's not be dishonest, be deceitful. Which leads to the next code, which is be honest with others and yourself. We've covered off being honest with others, but also be honest with yourself. A lot of times we lie to ourselves about what's really going on. Just don't do it. Just be honest. If you make a mistake, admit it to yourself. Just go, oh, look, I screwed up. I'll fix it going forward. It's not, you're not expected to be this perfect robot that never makes a mistake. People make mistakes. It's okay. Acknowledge it. I screwed up. I'm going to fix it going forward. So be honest with others and yourself. Next one is finish what you start and consider carefully what you start. There's a bit of debate about whether to include this one or not, but it was eventually decided, yes, we should include that. Because, and it is one from the original Knight's Code. It's like slightly changed. It's like it was just finish what you start. We added in carefully, consider carefully what you start. Because, and this comes to do with your own self-worth. And I know from my perspective, when I was younger, I started a lot of things that I never finished. And it's not good for your self-worth. And also, too, to consider carefully what it is that you're going to start, what you're going to commit to. And I mean, this comes from everything from relationships. If you're looking at having a marriage, so to speak, consider carefully the person you're entering into that relationship with. Are they a nice person? A lot of times, I know from my perspective, there's people that I've dated that, it was never going to work out. We were never going to get along. There's behaviours that they did that I now I wouldn't find acceptable. At the time I went, I kind of accepted, that kind of inappropriate behaviour, and it was like, I'm now if someone treated me that way, I'd be like, I'm just not going to be around you. So from relationships, from career as well, it's amazing. I deal with a lot of corporate disputes, a lot of lawyers and things like that. I have a lot of friends who are lawyers and barristers. It's interesting how many people that have taken on a career and spent their whole life doing something, and then they look back and go, I'd probably choose something different. And this is part of linking back to being honest with yourself as well. I mean, from a money-making perspective, you can make money pretty much doing anything. So careful what you start. I mean, do you want to head down? You might. I know a number of lawyers that have gone on to left the law and gone on to do other things. They went into law because it was kind of the thing to do or to make a lot of money. And if law is your thing, if you love the law, then that's great. Do that. But I think a lot of people would just with a number of careers, be a lawyer, doctor, or any of those professional ones where it looks like, I'll make a lot of money. In most cases, it's not the case. You actually have to work really hard. Certainly in a corporate environment. Like I said, I've worked in both corporate and construction. I've worked in a number of different parts, but certainly when I look at it, and I look at people, juniors in law, for example, that are working ridiculous hours, getting paid little money, and then I look at people that are working traffic management in construction, getting paid a fortune for holding a lollipop. And some people go, oh yeah, well they've got a better longer term prospect, over the longer term. Not always the case, and certainly not in a lot of cases too, depending on, there's a lot of promotion in all careers. So it depends on whether you love it or not. So, and this is where it's like, consider carefully what you start. Think about it. Is it right for you? Is it really something that you're going to follow through on? Because nothing, your own self-esteem does get smashed around a fair bit by starting a lot of things and not finishing them. There's something to be said for finishing something, and it works really well for building you up. And that's where, from my perspective, it's like now in my life, I'm very, very careful about what I choose to start, because I want to make sure that I finish it, because I know that I'm going to feel great about finishing it. And also too, I mean, having a lot of open things all at once, and this is where we talk about in the exceptional effort program that I've mentioned before that we run. Closing off tasks just gives you a buzz, and being selective. Doing a couple of tasks. Even Warren Buffett talks about that. I think he said, make a big list of everything you want and then cross off everything from number 5. And it just like, it's not even something you even look at. You only do the top 5. But we have a detailed program in exceptional effort as to how to achieve that. So finish what you start and consider carefully what you start. Next code is can allow vulnerability and emotion to show. Now, specifically got can there because this is where it depends on the circumstance you're in. Blurting out emotion and vulnerability to everyone all the time is not the best way to approach things, especially if you're in a leadership position. Yes, if you need help, ask for help. One of the hardest things I ever had to do was had some financial problems. And I needed money, and I asked my dad for help. Now that was that was really hard, like really, really hard to ask my dad for help. It was like almost acknowledging. I was going to say acknowledging failing, but that's probably not the right term. It was, but that's why we go through our teenage years to become an adult, become self-sufficient, and there I was, not succeeding. I needed the help of my dad. So having the ability to show vulnerability and emotion is important. I remember too another circumstance where there's a number of people I know that died in some very tragic circumstances, and I it was really emotional at that time. Well, not at that time. It was about a year later, 2 years later, I think it was. This is when I was quite younger. And I remember just with some friends, and male friends as well. I was crying my eyes out, and they, just holding me. It all come to roost, and I was able to do that and heal from that. So it is important to be able to show vulnerability and emotion, especially if you're in a relationship. Showing vulnerability, that's how you create intimacy. Being vulnerable to your partner, you're both being vulnerable to each other. But I said it depends on where you are. Certainly, if you're in a leadership position, you need to be the person that people look up to, that have faith in the direction you're going. So when things go wrong, you need to have a solution. You can't throw your hands up and go, I don't know what to do. A leader, that's not good leadership to say, I don't know what I'm doing. As in, I don't know what direction we're going. Don't know outcome. You might not know all the specific detail, and it's not a leader's job to know all the minute detail, but certainly the direction you're going, a leader needs to know that. So you need to be, that's why it can allow vulnerability and emotion to show. There are times where you should let it show, and you certainly should have the ability to be vulnerable and show emotion, have the ability to ask for help when you need it. But you need to be selective of where you show that. And it's a fine balance, but I don't think it's a fine balance. It's probably just knowing where to show it. And the last one is hold others accountable to the code, which really that's more just about sharing. This is appropriate behavior, or if someone behaves inappropriately, saying, hey, maybe that's not the best way of approaching it. And that's as simple as that. Hold others accountable to the code. So there's the code. The details are in the show notes. And hopefully from that perspective, or certainly from my perspective, living by the code has made my life tremendously easy, fun, and enjoyable. The code itself, we go through that: to like yourself and separate behaviours from the person, to laugh at yourself and not take offence at the opinions of others, exercise self-control, erring on caution where strength differential exists, use your strength to protect the equal rights, dignity, and welfare of all, lift up the weak and defenceless with succour given to those in need. Violence is only permitted on the battlefield with willing opponents to the extent the rule allows, or to the minimum extent required in self-defense. Refrain from the wanton giving of offence. Eschew unfairness, meanness, and deceit. Be honest with others and yourself. Finish what you start and consider carefully what you start. Can allow vulnerability and emotion to show, and hold others accountable to the code.
Thank you for being part of the SHAIR.care community and helping people around the world prosper. You're creating a bigger pie for everyone to share. The more people contributing to the world being a better place, the better the world becomes, for others and for you.